Good afternoon. We would like to call this meeting to order. We'd like to welcome anybody who might be here in chambers or visiting through our YouTube channel. This is a special meeting of the Kingman City Council held at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, September 9th, 2025. I'd like to turn some time over to our city clerk for roll call.
Mayor Watkins.
Here.
Vice Mayor Samley. Here. Councilmember Dykens.
Here.
Councilmember Savage.
Here.
Councilmember Staley.
Present.
Councilmember Walker. Here. Councilmember Ward.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item number 1 on our agenda, the council may go into executive session for legal counsel in accordance with ARS 38-431.03A3 to discuss any agenda item. The following items may be discussed, considered, and decisions made relating thereto. Item number 2A, market feasibility report and financial options for proposed sports, recreation facility, and other parks and recreational improvements. This is a follow-up to the market feasibility study presentation provided by CSL during the August 5th, 2025 work session. The previous session did not allow sufficient time for council discussion, and both the consultant and city staff have been asked with providing additional information in response to council comments. Deputy City Manager, Finance Director Tina Moline will present information on potential funding mechanisms. City Manager, turn some time over to you first.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Tyler online with us again, basically to go through and share a few more, some more information regarding the rec center and multi-purpose building. We'll let him go through, and then any questions that council might have for him, we can go through that. And then Tina has some options as far as directions going forward on funding. So thank you. Tyler, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, let me bring up some of my slides. There's some new information, and I'm just going to do just a quick recap of kind of where we left off the last time first.
Real quick, if I may, can everybody hear okay?
Yes.
I know it's a little quiet.
I was going to say, do we need to turn the volume up a little bit?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Check 1 2, check 1 2. How we doing? So let me bring this up. Here we go. So as you remember the last time, and I know you've spent more time with the report, but you know what we found for this study for a recreation center / sports center / event center, you know, there was a lot of definitions that were a part of our task in this market study. You know, there's a lot of supporting factors. Just in our site visit alone and the number of stakeholders we met with, there's a lot of demand for youth sports space. There's a lot of demand for just a third place. There's a lot of demand for gathering spaces. At the same time, there's a regional sports gap. You know, there's not a lot of facilities even within an hour to an hour and a half drive, even within a 2-hour drive to choose from in the sports space, nor in the recreation space. We are a growing population. It's an evolving population base that's traditionally been older, but there are younger families moving to the area. At the same time, nationally, sports tourism continues to grow. This idea of traveling tournaments and the dollars they bring with them is a notion that a lot of mid-size and smaller cities are taking advantage of and building complexes. And then our community survey, when we put out a broader net into the community about, okay, what's your interest in using this facility? How much would you maybe pay to use a facility? What are some of the amenities that you'd like to see included? And we did collect a lot of great data, and that was one of the questions I know asked by one of the council members, and I'll just actually bring that up is, you know, where were these respondents located? And this is just a quick look at the 1,500 surveys that were completed through the website that we created. And we did have about 1,000 people from the city limits, just over 1,000 or nearly 1,100 people from the city limits in Kingman. There were other people who maybe have cell phones, and most of the people, I think 80% of the survey respondents did take it on their cell phone. There are a number of them maybe who live in Kingman and have a Phoenix phone number, or you know, maybe they are Phoenix residents and happened upon the survey. I think the good news is at least a majority of respondents that did take the survey and went through the website are Kingman residents, and they're actually within city limits. And you can see that there were some from Bullhead City and some from other nearby communities who might have answered. So that cleared that point for us. And going back to some of the the other factors that maybe we need to be cautious about. We can't just come in and say, let's build the Anderson Fieldhouse, or let's build 10-court sportsplex that succeeded in just outside of Dallas, Texas. There are some factors we need to think about, including these are just more and more expensive to build. Where a $250 per square foot project in 2018 is now a $450 per square foot project. We have to be cautious with what really is the demand of the market and make sure that we're building something that gives us the greatest ROI, both in terms of finances for the building and the well-being of the community. We did a lot of interview outreach, I think 40 or so interviews with basketball and volleyball and gymnastics and other what we'll call external sports groups, people who aren't from the market, who maybe just indicated moderate interest. They wouldn't necessarily bring their largest tournaments out to Kingman anytime soon, but are more interested in smaller type offshoot series of current events that they do. And then we have a lower income base. Some of these bigger recreation centers we see around the country, are supported by maybe high membership prices and high daily admission prices that some of the residents can pay for them. That's not to say that there's a number of communities also around the country that, it's free of charge for residents and they're funded through a different way. And maybe they're built more to scale for the incomes in that area. There was another question about senior amenities and how maybe they've been included in some of our comparable facilities. And I'll actually just spin through over to a couple of those slides here. If you remember, we talked about the spectrum of facilities that we looked at nationally. Some were these tournament event facilities that really focus on sports events, and there are 8 or more basketball courts, and they're bringing in 3,000, 5,000 people at a time, and it's about generating room nights. Over on the far end, there's community recreation centers, and these are, they have 1 to 2 basketball courts, but they have a lot of community amenities. A lot of their footprint, maybe half their footprint, is dedicated to fitness spaces and education rooms. And then we do have several facilities in the middle that balance both. And oftentimes these ones in the middle are probably the most expensive because they are bringing together the amenities from both. This is a quick look at in our comp set, the 5 facilities, and they're largely the community recreation centers that we've identified as having significant senior programming. The Williston Area Recreation Center does have what I'd call a senior center located with a separate entrance in the facility, their senior room, which is an area with more passive activities and games and actually has connectivity to some of their fitness areas. And it is a meeting space for the seniors in the area. The other facilities included on the list don't necessarily have dedicated senior centers, but they do have amenities like their education rooms and fitness rooms, and they heavily prioritize, because they're in older population centers, they do prioritize Tai Chi for arthritis, senior cooking classes. The Pleasant Prairie Recplex does partner with Silver Series and has Silver Series programming throughout their facilities. So a lot of them, during the week especially, and Health Sports Factory in Rockford does pickleball and walking events during the week. They are becoming those go-to centers for seniors during the weekend and a lot of the weekends out of the year. Beyond the comparable facilities that we found, these are 5 centers around the country that do have a senior center integrated with a multi-purpose recreation center. I think North Glen in Colorado in the middle here is a really good example where it's designed in a way, it's 2 separate entrances. The senior center does have, another connection into some of the fitness rooms. But it is this design that allows multiple generations from around the community to interact with one another through various programs that bring together the senior side and the youth and multi-purpose side. Tucson, their El Pueblo Activity and Senior Center at the top here, it's more of a campus, but they're part of the same campus. They're 2 separate buildings, but there is this joint plaza, between them. So it does act as this type of community center for the multiple generations. So definitely things to think about there as we think about our population, what we want to support, and what our rec center is. And there are some, precedents for providing that kind of space within this larger multi-purpose project. And going back to some of the recommendations, and before we get to some of the questions, we can talk about, what the ideas were. Our recommended positioning was between this balance and a community rec center. I think we want to err on the side of recreation center because this is such a community need. But at the same time, we want to recognize the potential to host larger events. So how do we get the best of both worlds without spending too much money like some of these facilities that are in the middle that are maybe 8 basketball courts and very, very large complexes. So we came up with 2 versions that address this positioning on the previous page, and that is option 1, this fully dedicated indoor sports and rec center, and option 2, this multi-purpose event center. Basically identical buildings, but option 2 is slightly bigger because it's actually a concrete floor box that you could then, as needed, put down temporary wooden basketball courts onto the surface and then remove them if we're trying to host indoor concerts, flat floor events, consumer shows, that kind of thing. It does come with higher overhead costs because of the labor included to take those courts out and because it's a larger footprint. So you're going to run higher utilities costs. Here's some quick visions again of especially the community and rec amenities that would be associated with both options really. The indoor track, climbing wall was something that there was a high demand in our survey research, basic fitness amenities. And then here's a picture of the one wrinkle associated with option 2. So those basketball courts would be replaced with a space maybe a lot like Rocky Mount Event Center that has, some of these are retractable seats, some of them are roll-in bleachers, and then they can set up staging and host a variety of events and move the basketball posts up to the ceiling. We talked about sites, and that might be something we talk a little bit about later today, but I think all 3 sites are workable. None are what I call absolutely perfect, but Kingman Crossing is maybe the most promising, but maybe the furthest out from full development. But Mojave County and the Fairground site, and then the Centennial Park site, potentially workable. And we talked about funding. I know we'll talk a lot about that today, about what the options might be. But throughout Arizona, there's been various maybe combinations of sources. There's been use of some GO bonds, maybe backed by the city funding. There's been some sales tax specific bonds. The Marana Aquatic and Recreation Center had a 7-year half-cent sales tax. It had a finite timeline to fund that project, and that's something we've seen be pretty successful in some communities around the country lately. And then we talked about structure. How could this maybe be publicly owned, maybe authority owned, and then possibly operated by an entity separate from the city. And that's typically what we've seen, be the most successful. So the YMCA's, the Boys and Girls Clubs, sometimes a standalone nonprofit unique to the city takes over the oversight, and they can usually operate with a fairly slim team, as shown in the org chart over on the right. And then to wrap things up, we talked about costs and benefits. Option 1 being cheaper, has this higher ROI figure down at the bottom because it is $39 million versus the $54 million of option 2, the amount of expense that would be associated with the concrete, the larger footprint. But option 2 does allow you to host a larger array of events. There'll be more attendee days coming through there, more non-local attendee days, about 10,000 more, about 1,600 more room nights associated with that, and then about $2 million in economic impact every single year going to the community. In terms of financial operations, we did talk about both options would likely need an ongoing subsidy. And that's very typical for these facilities. I'd say that margin is slowly, gradually shrinking in many communities as they're managed better. But the expectation for an investment like this, that's geared really to be a community benefit, shouldn't be to break even or significantly break even. But those are the 2 kind of things I know I needed to update on, just about the survey, zip codes, and then the inclusion of a senior center examples. And I just wanted to run through that. those recommendations again and do a quick recap. That's all I had in terms of my end. So I know there was questions we probably didn't get to and comments from the council. So I'm happy to walk through those.
Thanks, Tyler. Council? Questions, comments, start with? Okay. Manager Walsh, was there anything else that you wanted to?
No, I appreciate it. Tyler, thank you very much. I know, and maybe this is the time to discuss this a little bit. I know Tyler had mentioned at the last time possible locations. So I don't know if council wanted to look into that more, or if we want to still kind of keep it high level and go through that before we get into the details. I know, Tyler, I think you presented three locations last time, one being two of them county property, and then one city-owned property near the Kingman Crossing. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. And there's Mojave County Fairgrounds, the site by Centennial Park. That's a little small, but could probably host something, and then the Kingman Crossing site, yes.
So there's some of the thoughts as far as locations go. I don't know if council wants to get into that, or if we want to jump right into funding options and look at, possibilities moving forward on what that looks like as far as funding goes.
Good questions. Site-wise, I mean, I think there's room for comment here right now about what we're thinking about sites. I mean, just off the top of your head. They're all those sites have great, different positives and some negatives. I know in the past, I think we've talked to I've talked to a couple people, and they like the idea of it being by Centennial Park because it's close to what we have already going on there. And almost everybody in the community knows where Centennial Park is. And so if you were to refer to, that new building right there by Centennial Park, Tim, how many acres is there that the county owns?
I believe there is, I want to say there's about, oh shoot, now catch me off guard. I think there's about 22-ish, or right around, technical term, right around 17 to 20 acres, I think, is where they're at right now. We are, they're looking at that. Obviously, they've got hopes of commercial or some sort of being able to sell that property to bring in some retail there. Talking with the county and seeing what they've done in other locations as far as like in Havasu, they worked with the city of Havasu on their city hall, and the city of Havasu purchased land from the county, and that's generally how it would have to go. We would have to look at either purchasing or a possible trade of land if we were to go acquiring land from the county. So one of the locations was this across the street next to the library there. Another location that was considered is co-locating on the fairgrounds property, or looking at some sort of option there. But again, it would be, if we worked with the county, it would be either a purchase that would be required or a land swap. And, looking at what land the city has that might be of value to them, that would be a consideration to look at. The third location being Kingman Crossing, that would be an opportunity with the Flying Fortress interchange going in. Louise is right off of that interchange. It would be a quick drive right around there. I know you look at Kingman Crossing right now, getting to that point seems a little bit hectic at this point, but I think once Flying Fortress is in, you can get on Louise, get down to that property. There would be some expense as far as getting the road over to Kingman Crossing, but that's land that we do own that would not cost us more to put it on. It would cost us to put the road in, but that would be that, so.
Right, which is a huge positive.
Yeah.
So. Council, any comments before we turn some time over?
Well,
Yes, Councilor
my
Ward.
only comment would be on the one at the fairgrounds or by the library is the congestion if you have a large event. Because on the weekends, you can't get through Stockton Hill and Airway to start with, even from Thursday on. So if you have a large event there on the weekend, you're jamming yourself up twice as bad. That's just my opinion.
Yes, Counselor.
I think that without the Kingman Crossing interchange in place, that you're making the recreation center more difficult to get to, especially if you're going to be relying on large events and people coming from out of town. It will be more difficult to get to, as opposed to being over by Centennial, where you just come right off of I-40 and it'd be centrally located. I wish we were further along on Kingman Crossing and that we had something in writing that it was going to happen in the near future. If I had that confidence, then I think that absolutely makes sense. But to put it over there without that kind of access, I think you might be shooting yourself in the foot. You know, you might have outside vendors who aren't going to want to hold events there because it is a hassle to get through and you're going through residential streets. I think you guys probably have some homeowners that might be upset about the traffic that you'd be bringing in, but I mean, that's just one other thing to think about. So I think that, yeah, putting it bicentennial is maybe the best place.
Counselor, you bring up an important point, and I think we've already heard from citizens over in the area around Flying Fortress. They're already voicing their opinion to the fact that we're going to add traffic just because of Flying Fortress. And so, you know, until we have Kingman Crossing in, it's tough to look at that property over there. It is. So, anybody else? Sure. Yes, Councilor Walker.
My thoughts is, I like Kingman Crossing. I think this could be a big anchor to draw people there. We don't know what's going on to the north of us, but I would bet that it is coming, and we own this land. I mean, we do need to get a road into this land eventually. This could help get that in there. The traffic situation over by the Centennial Park, I don't care if you're on, trying to get off Burbank, getting on Airway, turning west, it's a nightmare. I mean, I know we've looked at putting a traffic signal there, but I think we're gonna end up with a lot of off-site improvements at that location, plus having to buy that property. I think it's gonna be a big financial drain, or a larger financial issue at that location, is my thoughts.
Thank you. All valid points that are coming up. So, anybody else? Manager Walsh, do you want to continue?
Yes. With that, I'll turn it over to Tina. She's put together some good information as far as funding options and possible ways that we can proceed with this.
Yes. Thank you, Jeff, I think, is helping me out. Maybe Joel. IT, thank you. All right. Well, good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. So segueing from the actual discussion of the facility and all the great work that Tyler and his team have done, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the actual funding options for a facility and maybe some other improvements that we've talked about over the last couple of planning and priority setting retreats. So there are two components to funding this particular project, and that is the construction cost piece, which is a one-time cost, and then we have operations. So for the construction costs, what we have available to us is we have an opportunity to look at some grants. Grants are not going to cover a large portion of construction, but certainly we will be looking at economic development grants and any other sort of grant that might attract this type or might attract this type of facility. Also, outside contributions. Is there some agency that wants to share space or utilize space or participate in the funding process? So we'll certainly be be looking for partnerships in that respect. But for the most part, what we have available to us is, because we don't have cash reserves or a large cash reserve, we will likely be issuing debt. And we've talked about issuing general obligation bonds. As a matter of fact, this project is currently in our 5-year plan, being funded with GO bonds, and that is secondary property tax, so it's voters will have to approve of that. It will require voter approval. We also have the ability to issue additional excise tax obligation debt. That does not require voter approval. We currently don't have a lot of capacity, and I'll share that as we go through the funding option slides, but that is paid back with primarily sales tax and some state shared revenues. And then looking at our operating costs, we have advertising, so there's naming rights and sponsorships that can generate revenues. We've got user fees that you will dictate. And then ultimately, as Tyler shared, most of the facilities are subsidized with sales tax. So let's look at the construction costs and using GO bonds and what the impact could be to our property owners. And I have quite a few options on this slide, and I have them on here because we've talked about, there's a couple of different options that Tyler has shared for the facilities. And then in addition to that, a couple of years ago, and what's in our 5-year CIP now, are our Sunbelt Park, the phase 2 of our Sunbelt Park, that to complete it to the vision that we had all hoped is very costly. And so we had talked about issuing GO debt for that. So the Sunbelt Park is included as a possible improvement. We also heard last year from the consultant that performed the study for the golf course that our irrigation system at the golf course is in dire need of replacement. It's close to 40 years old, and so that is almost an $8 million project, and then possibly throwing in some renovations for the clubhouse, so that's $10 million. And then, of course, if we want to do it all, do a couple of projects, there are some options there as well as far as what the total cost would be construction-wise. And on the far right of the table is the cost yearly to our property owners. So depending on which facility you might be interested in for the recreation center, could cost anywhere from $250 to $350 a year to our property owners. And then as you look at the other different options, you'll see how that impacts them. This assumes 20 years. So for 20 years, our property owners would be paying the debt service on this facility or these improvements. If we look at excise tax obligations, it's a little bit different. So I want to focus on the far right 2 columns of the table. So with any sort of excise tax obligation debt, we are required to have at least 2 times revenues, pledged revenues, so taxes and state shared revenues, to cover the debt service payment. So you'll see when we look at our debt service coverage column, that's all fine. It looks like we could just issue so much debt to cover these projects. But at the end of the day, we have to actually be able to afford to pay the debt service. And so on the right, very far right side of the table, you'll see the fund balance percentage, where we fall if we end up having to incur the additional debt for these projects. And really the only one that meets your informal fund balance of about 30% would be about $10 million is what we could afford to issue and repay. So certainly you could combine some GO bond debt and some excise tax obligation debt to make any sort of improvements, but I would recommend not going much more than $10 million if that's something the council would want to entertain. But there is a little bit of an option there. So looking at the operating costs for the facility, because certainly that's going to be the ongoing cost and we're going to need to sustain that for the entire term of the facility overall, not just the 20-year debt term. So because the council has expressed an interest and has prioritized the facility, the recreation center rather, as a project that they want to see come to fruition, city staff has already built in to forecasts some operating costs, anywhere between $500,000 to $600,000. So that's already in our forecast. As far as the Sunbelt Park full phase and the golf course improvements, there won't be significant ongoing costs for those. We're already planning on hiring a couple of FTEs for the Sunbelt improvements that we're putting into place. So there wouldn't be much additional cost, so not significant. The big piece is that recreation center. So the net operating cost that we've already appropriated for or plan to appropriate for is $525,000 to $610,000. So looking at Tyler's slides for the net cost, right, revenues less the expenses, what we end up basically as a deficit, what we need to cover, what does that look like for the facility that is just a sports and recreation facility? Those two arrows, the first arrow is really just the net operating cost, doesn't take into account any sort of capital reserve, which I would strongly recommend for a facility like that. We definitely want to set aside some sort of capital replacement monies each year. So when that big cost comes in 5 or 10 years, we've accumulated some monies to cover it. But the net operating income you'll see is anywhere from $430,000 to $575,000. So we have that included in the forecast, and we almost have the full amount of it plus the capital reserve included in the forecast for this particular facility. When we look at the larger facility, the multipurpose event facility, its annual deficit ranges from $660,000 to $760,000. So we're still pretty close to covering those costs as far as what we have already forecasted and appropriated. Slightly may need to reprioritize and reevaluate some of our priorities in the out years if we want to ensure that we set aside that capital reserve, but I think it's something that's definitely doable if that's something the council would like to entertain. So what we're really looking for today is some direction from the council, some discussion from the council on the different facilities that Tyler has proposed, and some of the other improvements that we've talked about. Because if we want to go out for a GO bond, do we want to tie them together? Do we want to stagger them? But something that we'd like some direction and discussion on. And then what are the construction funding options, so at least to get the discussion going so we know over the next few months what to come back and speak to, as well as operating funding options if there is anything other than what we've already accounted for in the budget that we need to consider. So with that, Manager Walsh, there are any questions or further discussion?
Questions for Tina? Yes, Councilor Savage.
Hi, Tina. Nice seeing you.
Nice to see you too.
So everyone knows, as far as the city, the GO bonds voter approval and the sales tax TPTs not approved. If we put them both up and combine, what happens to us if we're hung out to dry and the GO doesn't pass?
If the GO doesn't pass, then we don't have the monies to construct the facility. So Councilman Savage, thank you so much for your question. In the event that we were to issue or go to voters with a GO bond, whether that be just for the facility, or if we said, hey, we want approval to do the facility, we want approval to do the Sunbelt Park, whatever we put into that ballot measure, if it doesn't pass, none of that passes. And so that we wouldn't have the funding to be able to move forward with any of those projects. We would only have maybe that $10 million in sales tax issued bonds.
My feeling about the whole thing, originally I was thinking to myself, and this was a few years ago, that it might be too early for an event center. However, just in the growth we've had in the last few years and everything that's going on in this city, I think it's a necessity. Just because it's going to warrant it with the extra people we have and more things to do for people. But my concern is mixing them. That's where I'm kind of hung up on right now. That's my question right now.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions? Yes, Councilor Saley.
Looking at these tax obligation issuance, this impact at all our ability to build that new fire station? Because we were talking about using this to fund that as well, weren't we?
Councilwoman Staley, we were talking about utilizing sales tax for that facility. If you'll notice in the existing and new debt service column, that takes into account the debt that we're anticipating on issuing. So for our connector roads on Flying Fortress and Airway Avenue, as well as the fire station. So it takes into account all of our debt, existing and new, and any of these projects as well. So it would not impact our ability to construct the new fire station.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, yes, Counselor Ward?
On that, geo bonds that if you issue those, do we still have room to do Kingman Crossing? If we were to issue bonds for that?
So Councilman Ward, the GO debt does not go again, it is a different bucket, let's say, of how that would be, of how sales tax does not impact GO bonds whatsoever. We would have property tax to pay those back because the property owners would be paying for the debt service. The sales tax would be completely different and has no effect on issuing debt for that.
Okay, thank you.
But that is something that we would have to take into account if for some reason we did want to issue debt on Kingman Crossing. That is not included in any of these figures.
Okay, so yes, Counselor Saley.
I don't know if this is a question for you or for Carl, but if we use geo bonds to fund this project, that means that the people who live in the city limits are footing the bill for construction. Is there a way to have a fee structure for people using the rec center that would reflect the people that live in the city limits, have a discounted rate, and then anyone using it that's outside of the city limits would have an increased rate because they did not participate in the construction of the rec center?
So,
Yes.
You always say no. Thank you. Okay.
Councilman Stay, I was just going to elaborate a little bit more and share that we do that with the golf course. We do that with our water users. So yes, absolutely, we would look at it from that perspective.
Okay.
That's a great question, since about over a third of our overall population is right there immediate, but it's out of city limits. Yeah. Yes, they would be. Yes. So, good question. Anybody else? Okay. Manager Walsh, anything to wrap up?
If I may throw a little more at you to chew on, if it would be the council's decision or preference, we have hired a consultant previously. We hired High Ground to do a study for us, a survey of our residents to see what they would be willing to do as far as funding options. The options we presented at the time, a sales tax increase and a property tax, those were not really high on their preference. One question that was kind of an add-on to those was, would the citizens be willing to pursue a GO bond to do a rec center or to do, one-time things? And that one surprisingly seemed to have the most positive response out of that survey. Looking at the three options, there's the rec center, obviously, there's the Sunbelt Park, and then there's the improvements to the golf course. One thing that could be a possibility if council would like to go this route is we could reach out to a High Ground or another consultant like High Ground to do a survey of our residents to see, hey, are these issues something that they'd be willing to support for a GO bond, and really get the sense that's out there, get the temperature out there before we pursued it too much. One thing that was good with High Ground is they can work on that. They can do that. They can do that work to survey our citizens to see what they would support out there, and then based on that information, they can help us in putting together informational packets and sharing the information on what we could do with that funding.
Manager Walsh, didn't, on a geo bond though, isn't that once again paid through, I mean, it's assessed through the property tax?
It is assessed through the property tax, but it basically, it's a limited time, it's a.
Right, there's a
over
sunset
a
on it, or
certain amount of
whatever you wanna
time.
call it.
Yeah, yep.
But that was more appealing to some.
And the way that wasn't the focus of the survey. The survey really focused on a property tax or a sales tax. But in looking at all options, that was almost an add-on question, I believe, if I remember right, on the survey of, would you support a geo bond, a temporary, basically a geo bond, which is a temporary property tax that would go to support a specific project. So, that, looking at all of the options, that was the one that they disliked the least, I guess would be maybe the way to put that.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Yes, Counselor Saley.
I think a survey would probably be a good idea to get a better feel for how much they'd be willing to invest in this project, because we're looking at two different figures here. And I'd also like to know what the survey says about making that kind of investment in the golf course. Just from what I'm hearing in the community, I don't think there's support for that, but I could be wrong, so I'd like to hear, don't start.
She'll get me started.
And then, maybe even a survey to see about the location, what would be more convenient for the community in those three choices that we have. It might be helpful, but what is the timeline to turn around and say, if we go the geo bond route, which I think is our only choice, what is our timeline to vote on that and then get that in next year's election?
So if that is the route council would like to go, ultimately, we'd have, and Annie can correct me if I'm wrong, but we'd be looking early 26 in order to put that on the ballot, and then it would be on the November ballot. So that would be something we'd want to do our homework, get all the details and the information together that we could share with the public before we got to that January timeframe, because once it's on the ballot, then as far as staff goes, it's information only. Obviously, council, you can support it and push it, but for staff, it would be basically here's the facts and information. So.
And then, I just lost my other question.
Sorry.
We'll come back.
Vice Mayor, what's your opinion on all this? You have a great connection to the business community and everything. I know, I'm picking on you, but I'd like to hear your weigh-in if you would share.
I think GeoBond is one of the only ways that we can get to where we need to go, and I do like the survey. I don't disagree with anything that's been said, so there you
good.
have it.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, any other comments? Okay, good, Counselor.
Have they advised you on the probability of this passing, if it's one item or two items, or if the items should be separate, when we think about finishing Sunbelt and a rec center?
And that's a great question, and I know that was one thing really that we would lean on them. When we discussed the sales tax and the property tax and worked with them on that, they were able to, in the way that they structured the questions, they could say, hey, this one is really strong, this one is a non-starter, and they would be able to, through their survey, they'd be able to come back with that recommendation to council. So I think it would be a useful tool in order to see the support for all three, because honestly, I think I wouldn't recommend putting all three separately on the ballot, because I think all three fail. I think here's our one recommendation, this is what we want to present. Do we have the support of the citizens to support it? So I think by going ahead of time with a group like High Ground, they can really gauge what sort of response we would get by having either all three, having just the two, or maybe just the one even. Where
are we at timeline-wise with Sunbelt, getting that first phase up and running, so that, I think it would be easier to pass something to expand that park if phase one was already built. If you could see that park was really happening, because we've been promising that for a really long time.
And I've got Mike here. Mike can speak to that. I believe it was last council meeting that we did have the CMAR
We did,
approved. So Mike will give us an update.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Thanks for asking those questions. We've got the agreement with our contractor at risk, and we're ready to really start fairly soon. And something I think I shared with you guys that we learned in the interview process with them that we think is pretty valuable is originally we said everything at Sunbelt Park is going to be turf, turf, turf. Now what we've talked to the contractor about is having maybe a splash pad there, a nice playground, things like that, and turf at first. That way it will get everybody else out there to enjoy that space and get more buy-in, I think. So that's kind of where we're at with it. And obviously the drainage channel comes first, but we're ready to get rock and rolling on it fairly soon, really. So
Timeline, 2 years, 3 years?
2 years for sure. We'll have the drainage channel in and be starting on the playground and the areas that we're talking about, splash pads, somewhat of a playground, not the whole playground because that's very expensive. And we also are in communication, I don't know if it's too early to say it, but we're in communication with BNSF because we have their approval because this park is going to be based basically on transportation, railroad, airport, and Route 66. So we've talked to BNSF about using their logo on the playground apparatuses, and now we've been in communication with them about possibly sponsoring more in that park. So we're looking at that, and we've already got the cultural study done on that park, so we can start applying for grants right away as well. So I think we've got a lot of really irons in the fire to keep it, to getting it started and building some momentum. So I hope I've answered your question.
It's muddy, but I think you said in about 2 years, the drainage channel will be done and maybe some park.
I think quite a bit of the park, I think, really. The first phase, I think, will be nearing completion in that time.
Okay.
And we'll have
2
better
years.
information from them once they get on board and can start compiling that. And I will keep you up to speed when we get with them on all that. So, like I said, we'll have better information as we get going.
Okay, thank you.
Is that better?
I wish the timeline were sped up. I mean, obviously, if we're trying to put something like this on the ballot, I wish we had the park like by next summer, end of next summer. It was something we could use, some part of it.
And like I said, I'll reach out to the contractor and see how they feel too, momentum-wise, where we can get going. But they're pretty confident about getting going and making good progress.
Okay, any other questions for Mike? Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions about this discussion? I know we all want to see something like this happen. It's just getting there and paying for it. Tim, you had mentioned high ground. What are we talking about on the price of a survey? And is it something that we've somewhat budgeted for in this whole process?
So the last survey that we did with them, it ran around 15,000, I think is what the cost was for that. So for probably that same price range, we could come back with some answers on really getting a gauge on where the community is on support for it.
Okay.
And the turnaround, I'd have to check with them. I know the turnaround last time was fairly quick. It was basically once we signed up with them, once we contracted with them, they were able to turn around, get those calls made and get us a response pretty quick, so.
So we're still probably looking at what, 2 months away, 60 days at least?
I would think
Before we hear back?
that'd be reasonable. We could easily get something, I think, by then.
Okay. Okay, council, any other comments, questions? Or are we done? Any closing comments, Manager Walsh?
No, I think we'll proceed that way. Staff will work that way. We will, sounds like there's support in reaching out to High Ground and really trying to get an idea of where the support is in the community. So we'll work that direction. Once we have that, we'll bring it back to council and share that information.
Okay. Tyler, once again, thanks for being online and being available today. So,
Thank you all.
Okay.
Excited to see how things keep moving and, happy to join up with you again, answer any questions after you review some of these materials more, and we'll see where we go.
real good. Okay, I think
All right.
we are
Take care.
adjourned. Thank you, and all have a good evening.